One key issue many firms are struggling with is the question of marketing return on investment. Let me give you an example. Assume you are the CEO of Air France. You have 100 million euros to invest, and you have to choose between either investing those 100 million euros into an improvement of your seats, or into a new advertising campaign, or into an improvement of your loyalty program. The question is, how can you pick? How can you choose between these different options? Or how can you predict or calculate or assess upfront before making the investment what the likely return on each of these three different strategies would be? Well, the most sensible approach for this is to go back to what we discussed in session 2, where we talked about the concept of CLV and customer equity, and where I explained to you that customer equity, which is the sum of all CLVs, is essentially the value of your customer database. So one route you can take to the question of marketing return on investment is that you say you should do whatever increases the value of your customer base most. So what increases customer equity to the largest extent? This brings up the question, how does marketing impact customer equity? Well, you remember that when we discussed this slide on session 2, there were three variables that I said are marketing related variables: the size of wallet, the share of wallet, and the customer lifetime. The other variables on this slide are either calculations or they come from other departments like accounting or finance. Marketing actions can certainly change customer lifetime. I mean, everything we discussed about loyalty and loyalty programs is related to that fact. However, a change in customer lifetime has the problem that it occurs in the future. If we extend the customer lifetime from 10 to 11 years, any possible benefit that we get occur in year 11. And then if you discount it back, the effect tends to be relatively small. But obviously, impact of marketing on customer lifetime is very established, and there are many ways how you can do that. Marketing may also be able to influence the size of wallet, but this is hard. Influencing the size of wallet means that as a firm, you convince customers to allocate more money on an entire product category. You convince customers, for example, to spend less money on rent, that they can spend more money on travel. This can be done, but these effects tend to be complicated and very long-term. And on top, even if you achieve, they benefit the entire industry, which means you invest money that also impacts your competitors. The most straightforward way to think of how marketing impacts customer equity is through share of wallet. Share of wallet assumes that the customer has already made a decision to buy a certain product, has allocated a certain amount of money to that product, the size of wallet, and at that point of purchase, the customer decides whether the product will be purchased by you or from a competitor. If you do anything in marketing, you may be able to increase the share of wallet. And an increase in share of wallet translates directly into a change in CLV. For example, a share of wallet of 40 leads to recurring revenues of $40, a contribution margin of $35, a lifetime profit of $295, and a CLV of $245. This is what we had on the previous slide. Now, if everything else remains equal, except that the share of wallet goes up to 45%, recurring revenues increase from 40 to 45, the contribution margin from 35 to 40, the lifetime profit from $295 to $337, the CLV from $245 to $287, and hence there is an increase in CLV of $42. If we do this for every customer and we sum it up, we get an increase in customer equity, and we can then compare the increase in customer equity to whatever we had to invest in order to generate the marketing action in the first place. Going back to our initial example, if the increase in customer equity is larger than 100 million and we only have to invest 100 million, the marketing strategy is a good one. If it is less than 100 million, it is a bad one. How is directly the link between marketing actions and share of wallet? Well, if you think of how people choose products, there are generally three ways and three reasons why consumers choose products: rational, emotional, and interpersonal reasons. There are many products or many instances where you choose a product because it is rationally the better choice. You pick a phone, you pick the one that has the better camera. You pick a flight, you pick the one that has a better seat, that has a better schedule, or that has a cheaper price. All of these are rational reasons or what we call value-related drivers. And the sum of all those rational reasons we call value equity. But value equity is not applicable to all situations. Sometimes you choose a brand, not necessarily because it is objectively the best, but because they care about the environment and you care about the environment, or because you like their advertising, or because they sponsor your favorite soccer team. We call these reasons emotional reasons, and the factors influencing them brand-related drivers, and the outcome of all of them is brand equity, a variable that I'm sure you have heard of in the principles of marketing class when we talked about branding. But value equity and brand equity is not the only thing, because sometimes you may pick a company or a supplier because of the relationship that you have with the firm. This is the classical example of a loyalty program. If you are part of a loyalty program, probably you are in a tiered loyalty program in an upper tier, and the firm treats you particularly well. You may not even look anymore on the rational and emotional reasons. You simply choose the company because of interpersonal reasons. There are relationship-related drivers that build relationship equity. And in any situations where consumers choose products, they do so either because of rational and or emotional and or interpersonal reasons. Value equity, brand equity, and relationship equity together impact share of wallet, which then, as we have seen before, impact customer lifetime and ultimately customer equity. So if we want to understand how marketing impacts customer equity, we need to understand how the specific drivers of value, brand, and relationship equity look like in your industries, and we need to relate them to share of wallet, size of wallet, and ultimately CLV and customer equity. How can we do that? Well, we do this through a survey. Look back at session 2 when we talked a lot about size and share of wallet, and where I told you in a B2C setting, you can do that by asking 4 questions. We used the example of Amazon. Now let's go back to the example of Air France or flying. The questions that you ask is, which of the following airlines did you most recently fly? The next time you fly, what is the probability you fly each of the following airlines? When you fly, how much on average does a ticket cost? And on average, how often do you fly? You have learned in session 2 that the first 2 questions help you to build the brand switching metrics and ultimately allow you to calculate share of wallet, and that the last 2 questions allow you to calculate size of wallet. In session 2, we used the last 2 questions as a reality check of how accurate our calculation of share of wallet was. We cannot do it this way here, because here we assume the only thing we have is the survey. So instead of using size of wallet as a reality check, we use the last 2 questions to actually calculate size of wallet and the first 2 questions to actually calculate share of wallet. If you need a reminder of how this goes, go back to session 2. Note that the calculation we did in session 2, where we looked at the share of wallet of Amazon, we could have done easily for all of the other brands in session 2, and we can do the same here. We can use the answers to these 4 questions to calculate every customer's size of wallet and the share of wallet for each brand in the sample. The next part of the survey is that we have to understand the different drivers of the different elements of equity. So we need to sit down and think, what are the value-related drivers in our industry? This is very industry specific, so it depends from one case to the other. But in airlines, it might be, how would you rate the overall quality of airlines, the competitiveness of prices, and possibly the route and the schedules. You identify all the most important value-related drivers, and you ask consumers to rate them on a scale from 1 to 7 for each of the competitors. You do exactly the same for the brand-related drivers, whether people pay attention to advertising, whether they think the airline is a good corporate citizen, and for relationship-related drivers. And what you will end up with is something that you can imagine like a big Excel sheet. For each customer, you know the size of wallet, you know the share of wallet that the customer allocates to each of the 3 brands, and you know how the customer evaluates each of these 3 brands along all the drivers. And now it is relatively straightforward to relate the drivers to the share of wallet. Essentially, you do a kind of regression. And if you do not know what a regression is, go on YouTube and check it out. A regression allows you to tell you how the different drivers of value, brand, and relationship equity relate to share of wallet for the different brands. And the process that you're doing is the following. First, you need to understand for the specific marketing action you want to analyze, how it impacts the different drivers. For example, go back to the initial example. We want to invest $100 million in an improvement of our seats. Go back to the framework here. Seats are probably value-related drivers. There's no reason why an improvement of seats would change brand or relationship equity. So we go to the value-related drivers. We look at the three that we have. Probably seats will not impact the prices, so the second question is not relevant. It doesn't impact the schedule and the timing of flights, so the third question is not relevant, which means the only question that possibly gets impacted by that specific marketing action is question 1, the quality. Once you have identified which driver, which questions gets impacted by the specific marketing action, you need to assess how much it likely will change. If with the old seats, we get an average on the scale of 3.4 on the scale from 1 to 7, what do you think we will get with the new seats? You can either do this by estimating it yourself or by running a separate study like a scenario-based testing or some form of marketing research that tries to assess this. Assume we estimate that the improvement in the average rating is 0.2 points. So if we invest the $100 million in seats, we move from 3.4 to 3.6. We then run a regression. Well, we run a specific form of regression, which is called a logistic regression. Again, if you don't know what this is, check it out on YouTube or on Wikipedia, because the regression will tell us how the drivers relate to share of wallet. And we can then use the regression to assess how a 0.2 improvement in one specific driver impacts share of wallet at the end. So for each individual customer in our sample, we can calculate how the new share of wallet is likely to be if seats shift that specific driver by 0.2 upwards. And then we simply do what we started with. With the new share of wallet, we calculate the new CLV, and with the new CLV, we calculate the new customer equity. You can do this in any industry for any type of marketing action. This is an example of an article that I attach as a reading in case you want to go into more detail. It has been used by airlines, a facial tissue company, a grocery store, assuming they want to improve the passenger compartment, advertising, a corporate ethics campaign. You have the investment, you have the change of improvement in one specific driver, or in the last case, even in 2 drivers. You have the percentage change that results from this from customer equity, the absolute change, and the projected ROI. Obviously, this is not a very precise way of assessing it, but it is probably better than not knowing anything. And I very strongly encourage you to try this out if you ever face a decision like this, because the beauty of this approach is that you do not need a CRM system, you simply need a survey, and you do not need extremely sophisticated statistics. So this can be done with a relatively limited budget and with relatively limited statistical knowledge. And if you do not have that statistical knowledge, this knowledge can be outsourced relatively cheaply. And this ends session 4, and I'm looking forward to seeing you session 5 in a week.